we're done. We're done with the crap. We're done with the Zionist talking points. Do you think that 40,000 people waving Palestine flags, shouting death to the IDF, has anything at all to do with the atrocities of the IDF that we're all watching on our phone every day for 20 months, and not so much to do with anti-Semitism? Could you answer that question?
Joining me to debate that line between free speech and hate speech is Tig Hickey, the Irish satirist and political activist, and Emily Schrader, the Israeli-American journalist, author and social activist. We appreciate both of you here on CounterPoints. The furor over the weekend's Glastonbury festival fall into almost two camps. There are those who think the musicians went too far, and there are those who think the regulators and politicians have gone too far. Calling for the death or the demise or the downing of something or someone in protest music is nothing new. It's what many bands have built their entire careers on. So, Tig, why do you think that these two cases, we're talking Bob Vylan, we're talking Kneecap, why are they being treated differently?
Well, they're being treated differently because they have had the temerity to stand up against the ongoing genocide going on in Gaza. And I think a very clear bit of evidence for that is that the act Bob Vylan has always been an anti-imperialist, anti-authority, anti-racist act. If people would like to refer to their lyrics have always been very, very strong on British authority and the British establishment. There's never been any issue. In fact, nobody in the British establishment has paid them any real attention, even though they're extremely well thought of in the punk scene. Now they're suddenly being banned and banished because they've had the temerity to stand up, particularly to British complicity in this ongoing genocide in Gaza. And I think it is an absolute disgrace and shameful that the British establishment is choosing to focus on some naughty words of a punk band in a field when the ongoing story that should be centred is that Britain is up to its eyes in the ongoing mass slaughter in Palestine. Just this weekend, we had a Haaretz article on Friday detailing Israeli soldiers themselves admitting that they're shooting to kill, that there's wanton death and destruction going on in Gaza. We've had more carpet bombing than we've seen in recent times. We've had the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which should be called the Gaza Extermination Foundation, killing upwards of 400 or 500 people since it came into being. And the British media want to talk about censoring a punk act. I think it is shameful, and people who will look back in this period will scratch their heads at how we have totally lost our moral compass.
Okay, Emily, what do you make of what Tig has said? Why do you think these particular bands are being treated differently from other protest bands in the past?
Oh, well, I wouldn't say that they're being particularly treated drastically differently. I also think it's important to note that there are many, many musicians and artists of different kinds who have said that they support Palestinians or who have called free Palestine or all number of different things. That's quite a bit different from calling for the death of an entire group of people serving in a mandatory draft military that they do not even have an option to not be a part of. So it's quite a bit different when you're talking about death to someone versus a protest song or a protest lyric. And I think that that's part of the controversy. When it comes to Kneecap, there was an additional controversy because they have flown Hezbollah flags. This is a designated terrorist organization in many countries, including the UK. And holding a flag like that is technically illegal in the UK and in many other places as well. But even if it wasn't, why you would be supporting an Islamist terrorist group that is responsible for the deaths of countless, by the way, Arab Muslims, far less than actual Israelis on the ground, is beyond me. I don't think that this is anything to do with solidarity with Palestinians. This is an embrace of extremism, and perhaps it's coming from a place where people are frustrated by things, and frustration may be legitimate, but that doesn't legitimize condoning the use of terrorism for political purposes.
Tig, pick up on that, what Emily's saying. Flying the Hamas flag, which we saw from Kneecap, they're a designated terrorist organisation, and saying death to the IDF, isn't that taking it a step too far than just saying free Palestine?
Well, I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that vast swathes of the global south would see the IDF as akin to a terrorist organisation. They would see Israel as illegally occupying Palestine. And many people in the West now are coming round to the realization of just how brutal, just how oppressive the settler colonial project of Zionism is in Palestine. And I think to demonize the resistance is getting harder and harder for the Israelis when on our phones every day we are seeing the brutal effects of the Israeli war machine all over the region. So in my view, when an artist in the context of a gig particularly says death to the IDF, by the way, he's not calling for the killing or the murder of individual people. He is commenting on what I would perceive to be a war. It might have started off as some sort of war. It's now an absolute genocide between an oppressive colonial force and people who are resisting that oppressive colonial force. In every context I can think of, you would say death to the enemy. If people support the Ukrainian war effort, as Wes Streeting went on record as saying recently, he said, oh, well, I wouldn't like to see the death of Russian soldiers. Well, unfortunately, that's what happens. That's conflict. There's a complete logical disconnect. If you want your side to win, the other side has to lose. And so to say death to the IDF is not calling for the death or killing of individual Israelis or Jewish people. It's calling for the death and the end to this oppressive military machine, which has carried out war crimes on a daily basis, admitted by their own human rights organizations and their own press in Israel. That's the story. And British complicity in that ongoing genocide is the story. To be centering the speaking points of a punk band or kneecap is a disgrace to the victims of this ongoing Holocaust.
Obviously, I disagree. I mean, I think also some of the claims that have just been made are not entirely accurate. Also, when it comes to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, I mean, the entire reason they're there in the first place is because the UN has failed repeatedly to be able to distribute aid, even after Israel had approved trucks upon trucks upon trucks of humanitarian aid. It still wasn't distributed. Now, I can't fault them completely for that, because a lot of the problem that they're facing on the ground in Gaza is coming from Hamas. It's coming from the corruption of Hamas. It's coming from the fact that they have stolen aid. They have shot Palestinians in the process of doing so.
Literally
and one
no
of the only
evidence.
bodies, one
There
of
is
the
no
only bodies,
evidence.
that's not true. There's plenty of evidence. Look at Arabic social media. There's plenty of evidence. In addition to
Arabic
that, it's the
social
Gaza
media.
Humanitarian Foundation.
Where's the authorities? Where are the
out-
authorities speaking that Hamas
that
is to
has
blame?
sent out
Where?
millions of meals to Palestinians in need in the Gaza Strip, including just in the past few days, millions of meals were distributed. The controversy has arisen because there are multiple groups who have been trying to get to these points at the same time. In addition to the fact he mentioned the article in Haaretz, this is something that the IDF flat out denied. In addition to that, they stated that they will be conducting an additional investigation into this. However, anybody who is directed to fire at civilians directly, this is a contradiction inherently of the rules of conflict of the IDF itself. So this wouldn't happen.
Emily, I'm going to direct us back to our free speech.
That should be investigated. But what he's saying is not the case, and neither was what Haaretz reported.
Okay.
When it comes to free speech, when it comes
All
to
right, so let me ask you this then, Emily.
know.
If we had a band, a different band, say, at a different venue, a different gig, chanting death to the Navy SEALs or death to Scotland Yard if they're talking about police brutality, do you think they would experience the same backlash as what we've seen for Bob Villain and Kneecap?
I think yes. I think you would see quite a bit of controversy over something like that. As I said at the beginning, calling for death to someone is very different than a political protest or a line. Even what he said, that they have a problem with the ideology or they have a problem with whatever. There's such a thing as legitimate criticism, and there's such a thing as illegitimate criticism. And when you're talking about death to an entire army of mandatory drafted 18-year-olds, that's quite a bit different than protesting. I do think you would see a lot of controversy if people said this about someone else. And I want to add one more thing about it that's especially egregious, and that is that the entire theme of Glastonbury was supposed to be about unity and respect and love. And this is something that is their values of many music festivals, of many artistic festivals, but especially music. And so to have someone do this, to use this festival music that's supposed to bring people together who have different views and who have different backgrounds, and to use that as a tool to call for death to an entire group of people, no matter who those people are, it's very, very problematic. If somebody had done the same thing about Hamas, which which actually is a terrorist organization, unlike the IDF, I also would say that it's not appropriate to use that type of language at a music festival, much less to broadcast it to millions of people. And I think that Bob Dylan was wrong. I think that Glastonbury was wrong. They should have known that these kinds of issues may come up, and they should have warned the artists about politicizing this issue and calling for violence, especially at a time of rising terrorism, of rising anti-Semitism, and of rising violence, including inside the UK.
Firstly, on for instance, on Bob Dylan. So Bob Dylan has lyrics in his songs that talk about, kill the Queen and FUCK Britannia. They've played gigs. They've definitely been on BBC before. They've only come to the attention because of the work, and we got to give them credit, the great work of the Israel lobby, both in Britain and in the US, which worked at extraordinary speed to get the band's visas revoked, I think in a couple of days. Extraordinary. If only the establishment could act as quickly for the people carrying out the genocide, British and US citizens, I think the world would be a much better place. Emily talks an awful lot about the mandatory conscription in Israel, but so-called terrorist organizations like Hamas, they never have mandatory conscription. All these evil terrorist organizations, they never compel anybody, least of all women. They treat women with an awful lot more respect and consideration without compelling them to be part of the movement. I don't think that's necessarily a black mark against the terrorist organizations that women have a choice whether to join them or not. But I think the bigger question here that we need to look at is not so much Bob Dylan, not so much Kneecap, but it's the 40,000 people in the audience shouting back those chants, the righteous anger of those people. Emily might believe that I'm anti-Semitic. She might believe that Bob Dylan is anti-Semitic, Kneecap, the UN, the Pope. But the fact is that not all these people can surely logically be anti-Semitic, not the little old ladies that I go on marches with every week. All these people are righteously angered at the shooting of children in the head, at the organised mass starvation of the Gaza Extermination Foundation, which 100 charities have come out today to condemn as insufficient and, I quote, deadly.
We've got Bob Dylan, we've got Kneecap. They weren't the only bands or artists at Glastonbury to show their support for the Palestinian cause over that weekend. Now, among some of the numerous others who did was the Australian band Amyl and the Sniffers. Now, they've come out on social media to support Bob Dylan and Kneecap, saying that the media frenzy is trying to make it look like these were isolated incidents from what they called bad bands, rather than the status quo. So, Emily, to that point and to what Tig was saying, what do you make of that argument from other bands that were there, that the highlighting of only these two bands is a way to change the conversation and make it look like these were two bad apples?
I'm not sure that's the case at all. The fact that other bands made statements is something I actually referenced at the beginning of even this conversation now. There were other groups, other individuals. There were people who had Palestinian flags. Whatever. I mean, people can say what they like, but the reason people are focusing on the two particularly more extreme examples is because they involved explicit calls to violence or support for designated terrorist organizations. And I think that distinction is very, very important and needs to be made. And as for the assumption that a mass of 40,000 people chanting something, whatever it may be, cannot possibly all be anti-Semitic, I would direct you to history when it comes to rallies for the Nazis or mass organizations calling for death to America and death to Israel and the Islamic Republic, which I know you love so much. And also, I think that the idea that Hamas or other Islamist terrorist organizations don't have mandatory draft for women is somehow feminist or empowering to women. That is really, really rich. I mean, it's hard to have a response to such a ridiculous argument. Yeah, Hamas, which invaded Israel's sovereign borders on October 7th and mass raped people. Yeah, that makes at a music festival, no less, at a music festival, somewhere where they kidnap people, that there are still hostages in Gaza. It's absolute insanity. There is no logic to this argument. I hesitate to even respond to it because it's so ridiculous, but I think it does need to be called out.
Tig,
thank you so much for dignifying me with your response, Emily. I really appreciate that. And you know what? God grant me the arrogance to be a Zionist, in the context of defending what we have seen.
I don't think you need any more arrogance, actually. I mean, after all, you received an award for your activism for Palestinians given by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Yeah, Islamic Republic of Iran. You're a satirist. You went to the Islamic Republic of Iran where satire is outlawed and punishable by time in prison. Like, where do you get off?
So that's not true.
You don't need any more arrogance. You don't need any more arrogance.
Satire is outlawed. Well, I suppose your viewers at home can have a look to see if satire is outlawed in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Listen, Emily, we're done. We're done with the crap. We're done with the Zionist talking points. We're done with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is delivering all these meals and it's doing it in this wonderful humanitarian spirit.
Palestinians starve,
we have seen a scale of war crime that we will never be able to unsee. And I think that's the key point.
Yeah,
you're underestimating
actually,
the effect of 20 months of us watching the most heinous war crimes imaginable.
You're shilling for the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is an expansionist
the audience at Glastonbury to a Nuremberg rally. That's absolutely fine. But we're not buying it anymore, Emily. We're not buying it. The jig's up.
It has nothing to do with buying it. It has to do with your faulty logic. You're claiming that 40,000 or 30,000 or however many thousand can't be wrong. I'm saying that's not the case. And it doesn't matter if they're chanting against Jews or Arabs or any other group of people. The idea that because there is a mass that is inflamed and saying something aggressive, calling for violence, that they can't all be wrong is a logical fallacy.
And Emily, here's another logical fallacy. Do you think that 40,000 people waving Palestine flags, shouting death to the IDF, has anything at all to do with the atrocities of the IDF that we're all watching on our phone every day for 20 months and not so much to do with anti-Semitism? Could you answer that question?
I think it has a lot to do. Yeah, I can. I think it has a lot to do with the disinformation that's being spearheaded, especially by people like you who continue to sanitize and whitewash the crimes against humanity being committed against disproportionately Arab Muslims in the Arab Muslim world. They have colonized Iraq. They have colonized Syria. They have colonized Lebanon. They have colonized Yemen. All of these countries are projects of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is the actual colonizer in this region, which is the leading terrorist entity in this region and is the core of the problem in the Middle East, including, by the way, in Gaza.
Melinda, could I just ask one last question, please?
You can, and then I'm going to move you both on shortly. Go ahead, Tig.
I just wanted to ask Emily if, I know she condemns, death to the IDF. That's absolutely unconscionable from her perspective. I just wondered if she would condemn, there are no innocent civilians in Gaza, Isaac Herzog, president of Israel. One of the options is to drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza. Israel Minister of Heritage. Those are animals. They have no right to exist.
This was condemned by the Israeli government. You're aware of that, right?
Flatten Gaza, no time for mercy.
Condemned by the Israeli government.
Knesset. Wipe Gaza off the face of the earth.
The statements you are reading have been condemned by the Israeli government. And if they are not, they're referring to Hamas.
Okay, I'm going to move us on to our final segment because we're going to run out of time. The Israeli lobby is widely regarded as one of the most powerful in the world, and it was very quick to speak out and demand action against both of the artists. Kneecap was dropped by their booking agents, a few months ago, and Bob Vylan's US visa, as we've heard from Tig, has been cancelled before its upcoming tour. So, Emily, let me ask you, is this hypocritical from a country that fames itself as land of the free, where free speech is enshrined in the Constitution?
Well, I don't think that incitement to violence, especially with a high likelihood of something actually happen, which we have seen, including in the United States, is protected speech under the U.S. Constitution. Yes, the United States has a very broad interpretation of free speech. They always have, much more so than we see in many European countries. But when it comes to hate speech, this is not protected speech. There is a plethora of evidence of legal precedent when it comes to that debate. And I think that when we're talking about a time when there is really a almost unprecedented rise in anti-Semitism, where you have Jewish individuals being targeted on the streets, we have synagogues and Jewish centers that have nothing nothing to do with Israel that are being targeted. We've had open calls to violence and attacks on Jewish people in many major American cities. So they are right to be concerned about this conflict, because there is a level of disinformation and subversion when it comes to telling the story about what's happening in Israel or in Gaza that we're seeing through social media. A lot of it is artificial. A lot of the narratives that we see be the most prevalent on social media are not in fact accurate and are not in fact reflective of what the public in those countries actually thinks. So, for example, if you're on X today, you might think that something is much more severe or prominent than it would be according to statistical polling of public opinion of what people think is going on in Gaza or in Israel. So there is a disconnect here between what we're seeing on social media and subverted narratives that conveniently seem to align and advance the interests and the agenda of regimes like the Islamic Republic of Iran and Russia on social media. So we can't always believe everything that we're seeing online. And so I think that the response from the U.S. government is justified in this scenario. I think that they're concerned about ongoing upticks in violence, and this is exactly what we would have expected, I think, from this administration in the U.S. Whether you agree with them or not, it certainly isn't a surprise.
Tig, let me put this to you. If you're a band, you're an artist, and you're going to say things that you know are provocative, and then you're going to stand by them, shouldn't it just be, well, too bad if you don't like the consequences? They said it and they stuck to it, and they just have to wear what comes their way.
I'm sure they will accept the consequences. I mean, if I have a sense of Bob Vylan and I have a decent sense of Kneecap because they're from my own country and I think they're incredible artists, they will take the consequences completely. They're anti-imperialist, anti-racist acts. And I know Bob Vylan has already come out today and made a statement about the fact that it means more to him to be standing up and doing the right thing. And I think history will vindicate him. I think history will look back in this period, as I say, and they talk about this story being centered at a moment where, and supposedly this is to make Jewish people feel safer. Now, I am at rallies with Jewish people. I speak to Jewish people all the time. Jewish people are some of the strongest voices in the pro-Palestinian movement, as everyone knows. So to, again, conflate Judaism and Zionism, it's the oldest trick in the book from the Zionist perspective. But again, we're not buying it. Nobody's buying it. I don't for a moment feel like, I know many fans of Kneecap, for instance, who are Jewish. They don't feel unsafe by what Kneecap are doing. And even if it was a sense that we have to make Jewish people feel more safe, of course, I would support that whatsoever. But to totally ignore the fact that dozens of Arab Muslim Palestinians are being killed every single day. And Emily says, don't believe everything you read online. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But I have friends. My friend Nick Maynard is a surgeon, a British surgeon in Gaza right now. He's texting me every night going, 12 and 13-year-old boys are coming in here malnourished. He's seeing kids who have been shot in the head. Like, who's doing this? Like, would Emily acknowledge at all anything that the Israeli army have done in the last 20 months that she would say is completely wrong, that it shouldn't have happened? Why are all these people being murdered every day? Why is it still going on? That's the story. A punk act saying something in a field is not the story. And you can say that I'm shilling for Iran, but actually everyone I speak to who's not shilling for Iran, like grannies in Ireland, ordinary people who are just outraged at children being killed, are we all anti-Semitic? Is that where you want this logic to conclude to, that we're all anti-Semitic and that the Israelis have never done anything wrong?
So I haven't said at any point in this conversation that you're anti-Semitic or that anyone who criticizes Israel is anti-Semitic, for the record. But when it comes to what's happening in Gaza, I mean, you've named several examples of, 10 or even a few days ago, there was a report about 30 Palestinians who were killed. And even after investigations from BBC, from multiple independent media agencies, they weren't able to verify that the claims being made by some of these Hamas-controlled and Hamas-led organizations and bodies of the Gaza government were accurate at all. They don't know who is responsible for what shooting, because a lot of what has happened has been at the hands of Hamas. We have testimonies from many Palestinians on the ground saying that it is Hamas who is shooting at them. So your claims are not entirely valid when you're talking about something that's happening in the context of an ongoing war. And you say, why is this happening? It's happening because it's a war. It's happening because it's a war that we did not start, that Hamas started, that they wanted, and they have refused to surrender. They have refused refused to give up governance. And most importantly, they have refused to return the hostages. And you cannot sit there and say, oh, well, why is any of this happening when they still are holding hostages? They haven't even tried. How many offers has Israel made? How many times has Israel tried to have a ceasefire in order to
before we get into the ceasefire debate, because I know you're going to jump on that, Tig, I'm going to draw us back. Do you think that individuals are risking more by speaking out than the governments that they're protesting against? We've seen international arrest warrants for people on both sides of this conflict. Do you think the individuals are being dealt a harsher punishment in a real, immediate, real-world sense than the governments they're protesting?
You mean then the governments they're protesting against? So as in people who are protesting against Israel are receiving a harsher consequence than Israel?
Than the Israeli government officials who have also been sanctioned, but nothing seems to happen, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think on its face, that's true, because anytime you're talking about and it's not specific to this conflict, anytime you're talking about an individual who's taking action, they are likely risking more than any government. That's just the way that the world works. Now, should it be that way? That's a whole other issue. But yeah, I would say that, of course. I also want to differentiate once again that there is a significant difference between protest something and being an activist against something and supporting a terrorist organization, supporting a regime that is seeking to destroy the rest of the Middle East, destabilize the Middle East, and wipe entire countries off the map, like the Islamic Republic, and calling explicitly for violence, like we saw with the death to the IDF chants or with any of the other chants that are calling for violence. There is a big difference, and it matters what you say.
Tig, we've only got a couple of minutes left. Bob Villan, you know, you're a little bit familiar with him. They're very popular in some areas, not in others. And now the whole world is talking about this punk duo. Same with Kneecap. Are bands doing this for publicity?
No, they're certainly not. Because again, Kneecap, Bob Villan, like for years have been making anti-imperialist work. They're not jumping on the bandwagon to make a buck out of pro-Palestinianism. Anybody who has ever spoke up for Palestine would know how ridiculous that is when it's a career-ending thing to do. Usually I have had, I don't know how many restrictions and repercussions for speaking out. And I think it's a kind of a strange thing to frame that these guys are just sticking up for Palestine to further their career when they've just had their visas to enter America revoked. But I just want to say, just to conclude, because I spoke to Palestinian friends before I came on here today who've had family members who have been murdered, who are on their phone day and night waiting to see who else are their family and friends who have been murdered. That's the real story, guys. And I really feel like looking back in this period, the temerity for somebody who supports Zionism to frame a few naughty words from a punk act in a field as the big thing that we need to be morally outraged about right now. When we've seen mass starvation, we've seen conservative estimates of about 100,000 people killed, about 25,000 children, guys, 25,000 children. I wish I had that kind of arrogance.
Yeah, I just want to say that Zionism is the right to self-determination of the Jewish people in their indigenous homeland. It is nothing more and nothing less. It doesn't say that anyone else does not have a right to statehood or to self-determination. And so to use that as sort of a tool to say, oh, well, Zionism is evil. I don't have a problem with Jews. I just hate Zionism. It's entirely inaccurate. If you are an anti-Zionist, you are anti the self-determination exclusively of the Jewish people, and that's ridiculous on its face. Furthermore, I just want to add one more note about the colonization argument. The Zionism is literally a decolonization project. That is what we're seeing in the state of Israel. It is Jews who were here before Islam, for example, even existed. And I'm not saying that to say that Palestinians don't have rights or they shouldn't have a state or anything like that. But it is ahistorical, and it's important that we emphasize the reality of history and who is actually from the Middle East. It's very important to note because this is used as an argument to justify all kinds of heinous crimes against innocent civilians, such as what we saw on October 7th, including, by the way, at a music festival.
Okay.
Can I just say at the end, fair play to me for riling up the Nuremberg rally at Glastonbury.
This is exactly why...